Welcome to another edition of the Power Connector podcast. I'm your host, Derek Dickow, and with me today is Richard Karp, managing partner at Karp and Associates, approaching 2 million square feet in multifamily, retail, office, light industrial, with experience more than 25 years?
About 30.
I want to say about 30 years in Lansing, Ohio, and the city of Detroit. And a story about Richard, I met him at a wedding a little less than a year ago, and I read about him in the newspaper about 6 months ago. And then I just picked up the phone and called him, and I asked him if he'd like to participate in our event, and he was open to it. And so I'm looking forward to sharing his story. We had lunch, broke bread, which is something I love to do. And today what we're going to do is have what I like to refer to as a curiosity conversation. Richard has vast experience in construction, development, public-private partnerships, and just all around interesting story, interesting journey, one that went all the way back to Israel. So, Richard, I would love to start this conversation as I start all of my conversations with just share with us what's new and exciting in your world.
Yeah, it's an exciting time now. And by the way, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to participate in your event. If anyone hasn't been to one of your events, they're well attended. They're attended by talented people in the industry. There's always plenty to learn. We find ourselves in the commercial real estate industry in an odd time. It's a little challenging. We have likely one or maybe two more interest rate hikes by the Fed until they achieve their stated goal of 2% inflation, which would be great. But this puts a lot of stress on the ability to make projects pencil. We still have construction pricing seems to have started to level off. There's plenty of demand in the for sale residential sector, which is not our sector, but the economic movements are related, of course. So we follow those closely. There's a surprising amount of demand for single family homes. It's challenging. We find ourselves, our projects kind of span 2 or sometimes 2.5 years. So we're skipping over sometimes the beginnings and ends of different economic cycles. So which makes it even more challenging to plan around cycles because of the duration of our projects. So as a result of that, we have to always try to operate a little more conservatively. And of course, there's a benefit to that. You can't stretch the limits as much, but maybe you shouldn't anyway. It's been our motto. So we're still moving forward with all the products that we had in place prior to the volatile economic situation. Our lenders are still happy and secure, which is thankful. And we see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. We're guessing hopefully by the third or fourth quarter of 24, we anticipate some significant leveling off. Unfortunate part is during that time, we'll probably see some people fall out of the industry who maybe were trying to push the envelope a little too far. And that's a healthy, natural gestation of our industry. It moves in cycles. People jump in when it's easier to do, and when times get lean, they get weeded out. It's a little bit of a law of the jungle sort of situation. But we've watched this during our 30 years in this business. 1992. So actually, this will be our 31st year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're pleased, and we feel fortunate that we've been able to survive this long, given all the 2008 crash, the pandemic, the cycle we're in now. It's challenging, not as much as 08, 09 through, I guess, 13 is when we started coming out of that, but we learn a lot from these cycles. We learn that we need to be a little bit more conservative sometimes than we'd like to be. And that's hard for a lot of people in real estate development to incorporate into their plans.
So part of the success of your business over the last 30 years is a combination of being patient, being conservative, kind of understanding the way the market is reacting to things, and then your approach is long-term. I mean, takes a couple of years to put a good deal together. You're not rushing into anything. I think a lot of the newer or younger developers that we come across that run into these kind of problems is they're just kind of spraying and hoping for everything to come their way. And in a good economy, everyone's a real estate developer, but here you are 30 years later, still putting together these impressive projects in downtown communities that really help change the landscape for people that live within and enjoy the city life. I would love to go back to some 30 years ago. I know we shared this conversation. You shared your story over lunch, but a little bit more about how did you arrive into construction? Is it something that you always dreamed about as a child? Is it something that you had a mentor who said, "Hey, come with me to a site," and you said, "I love this"? How did you arrive into this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just for reference, I was raised in a middle class household by a lawyer and a social worker. No construction background whatsoever in not only my immediate family, but also not in my extended family. So it was, there was always a focus for me because of my desire toward engineering. I worked on cars. I restored older sports cars as a hobby and as a vocation for a while, and that very easily led to always had an interest in building, assembling things, putting things together. So my foray into construction was really just something that I enjoyed, and I was a carpenter primarily, self-taught. Spent a lot of time on job sites with other people on other jobs, and then some of my own small residential remodels. Graduated to becoming a general contractor, doing light commercial, multifamily, some mixed use for others, and quickly realized that I could probably be more rewarded, more challenged if I were also the customer, the developer or the property owner. So that was a natural progression. Didn't have a lot of resources cash-wise, but I did have a lot of time. So I was able to research a lot of different sources of funding, which now make up a lot of the urban mixed-use capital stack is composed of sometimes as many as, we did a project in downtown Flint that had 14 sources of financing. This is a mixture of conventional permanent debt, construction loan. Usually the construction loan converts to permanent debt, municipal, county, state, federal, or private grants. There's a number of tax credits that we've used. The first project I did in the early 90s was a very small 2-story, 10,000 square foot, north of Lansing's capital in an area what's now called Old Town. This was 1992, a $500,000 project in 1992 dollars. This was a historic building, so and I was not familiar with any of these programs. It took me about 13 months with some mentorship from the then development director of the city of Lansing, who connected me with a private nonprofit technical services provider, a nationwide organization based in New York called LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation. They had a presence in Lansing and Grand Rapids. So this Lansing development director gave me this very talented woman who was the LISC technical assistance provider. She did kind of take me under her wing and drove me to Grand Rapids. We visited a developer, a low-income housing tax credit developer in Grand Rapids named Denny Sturdivant, who was very sharing with how he layered the low-income housing tax credit, how to use it. That wasn't quite enough to do this project, this $500,000 project. So again, it was a historic building, so I studied the use of the federal historic rehab tax credit. There were probably 13 different sources for that. $500,000 project. You know, if we were to calculate my hourly rate based on the time, it'd be less than 5 cents, right? It would be, maybe it's negative.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, I was in my mid-20s. It was a time to learn. And that's really the only way to develop expertise is you have to understand every source of financing that you're using. Oftentimes there are rules which conflict with other sources of financing. So it really requires a full-scale knowledge of, you know, what conflicts, which sources combine well with each other. And tax law changes. You have to be a student of tax law if you're using tax credits. Grant programs change. The political environment changes. You know, it's a constant study. We have to be students of our craft, so to speak. Yeah, that was really you know, once I had developed this knowledge base, there was no point in squandering that, and especially if the historic rehab part of construction I found the most challenging. A lot of people don't want to venture into that because of the pitfalls, the unknowns. Those are the kinds of challenges that drove me. You know, problem solving has always been something. You know, when you solve a problem, I find that really rewarding.
Sounds very complicated and like a lot of brain damage trying to get 14 different lenders to the table to help you. But you mentioned you had a lot of time on your hand early on in your career, and you invested, probably made a few mistakes along the way. What would you say was your biggest lesson from putting that first deal together?
There were many. It's hard to rank which one was the biggest, but you know, I think that the overarching lesson is that when you embark on a path that you don't have a lot of knowledge of, and you plan to gain knowledge, expect and be prepared to make mistakes and fail, as horrible as that word sounds. The lessons we learn from failure are, I believe, are far more valuable than any lessons we learn from succeeding. You don't always know why you succeeded when you succeed, but when there's a failure, it's a lot easier to dissect that and figure out what exactly did you do wrong. We operate in you know, primarily 4 communities: Toledo, Detroit, Flint, and Lansing. They're the real estate development communities. Even in Manhattan, it becomes a small circle. We're all watching each other. We're watching each other succeed, and we're watching each other fail. When we see another development project or company fail, it's an opportunity for us. You know, we bring our attention to all our staff. We dissect that problem. Nothing to do with you know, we're sorry to see anyone have misfortune, but this is an opportunity for us and our staff to learn without having to have made the mistakes. So that's the least expensive way to learn that. Obviously, we're not in the middle of it, so we don't get all the details, but it's important to accept the fact that we're going to make mistakes, like on a regular basis, and embrace those and learn from them. Otherwise, if you don't learn from them, you'll keep repeating them.
No, it's an important area to mention, is that you're learning from the mistakes of others, because you're rooting for everybody to win, because if they win, you win. Community wins, and then that's a win for everybody. But I've not heard somebody say that I also watch the mistakes of others to take back to my team so that we don't repeat the same ones. I appreciate you sharing that. So the first building was a historical. How did you make your venture into retail, into the mixed-use market?
So this first project, again, Lansing's Old Town. It's about 12 blocks north of the Capitol, just over a mile. It was the first establishment of the city of Lansing. When the Capitol was moved from Capitol Park in downtown Detroit to Lansing, it was moved to an undeveloped wooded area, away, you know, a mile south of what the established historic downtown was. That little historic community, by the time the 1970s came around, it was almost completely divested from. Fortunately, it was paid so little attention that there was even no reason to tear any of these buildings down. By the time I got there in the early 90s, It was still a bad part of town, but it had the same structure and bones of any historic downtown. Lot line buildings right up to the sidewalk. If there were any parking, it was in back, not like our conventional strip mall situation. So this happened to be a two-story building. The first floor of a main street is not conducive to residential, right? It's just not comfortable for the tenant to have pedestrians walking by their living room window on a regular basis. So first floors in downtowns lend themselves greatly to retail or retail-ish office. So it was more the project that kind of dictated what the obvious uses were. There was a demand for housing. It was the beginning of the loft residential craze, probably started in the late 80s. We just happened to be fortunate to have a project like this to develop some knowledge in what has now become, again, this is my opinion, the most desirable way to develop real estate in any major downtown is this mix of uses. What we've learned from COVID, is that maybe we can't rely on any one of those uses because the markets move around, and residential, office, and retail, they don't move necessarily in sync as far as demand. So it's almost it acts as a good defense against, well, it's a market diversification, so to speak, to use that term from investment. You've always got something that likely will still be performing even if one of those sectors is not. And again, really, it was that project. It was the desire to work on historic buildings in a conventional historic downtown. And we have primarily stayed in that little section of our industry for the entirety of those 3 decades. We're exclusively urban core focused, and almost exclusively mixed use before it became even a real buzzword, so to speak.
Yeah, I remember, and you mentioned Capitol Park in the city, where the first capital of the state was, but you've also had a tremendous renaissance and participated in that area. I mean, a dozen years ago, that was probably the most unsafe area in the city of Detroit. And today it's probably